All right, welcome from a windy day in the north. A little windy.
In the north?
Yeah, I'm in the north.
You're north now?
I guess so.
Well, hey, listen, if
Midwest.
I was gonna say, dude, if Ohio's considered the Midwest, you can be whatever the hell you want to be.
Yeah, I'm central Wisconsin, I guess, but we're
You're
sort of northern.
Yeah, it's been a windy week here too. It's April 3rd, it's 2025. Welcome aboard, everybody. You listen to the Crushing Iron podcast. This is episode 843.
Yep. The boats are flying all over the harbor.
That's it. How many pollen allergy comments have you gotten in Training Peaks this week?
I don't know. I blocked that out.
You blocked it?
No, I don't know.
Filter. Yeah, eyes are puffy, pollen falling everywhere. I mean, it is true, though. Like, I woke up yesterday and it was just, like, yellow everywhere. But for some reason, I don't know if it's because I started, like, pre-popping the Claritin, like, a week or two early, get a little bit ahead of it. But it hadn't really put that much of a dent in me.
Yeah. When I grew up, I had pollen allergies in the fall, and now I have them in the spring. I don't understand what's going on with that.
Yeah,
I really, really, really try not to get it, to use stuff like Claritin, but it definitely works. I really limit it, but I suffer. I force myself to suffer a little bit.
Well, good for you. I don't. I'm I got enough things to suffer through, and allergies ain't one of them. This is going to be, however, the first grass cutting weekend of the year.
The worst part for me is swimming. I get
that's never bothered me, but I have heard that though. Like if people get out early, that because it just sits on top of the water. I
don't even know if it's. I mean, maybe it's allergies. I don't know, but it's not even like I'm running nose. It's just that my sinuses just go, like they're like a overinflated balloon.
Well, maybe you're just like most triathletes that you're just allergic to swimming.
Yeah, that's probably more likely.
It's definitely more likely. It's
like everything. You love to think about it and talk about it, but
for sure, man.
It's the most fun to talk about it.
Yep, and it is not everyone's. I mean, some people love swimming. It is. It's for whatever reason, it is that, and that's. I mean, you would think we would launch into a How to Not Suck at Swimming podcast, but we're not. We're gonna move through. It's a busy weekend.
How to not suck at allergies.
How to not suck at exactly. How to not suck at allergies. It's the first weekend where my Iron Track app's going to be ding, ding, ding on Sunday. It's always kind of the ringing end of the season. Pretty pumped about it. Again, we talked about it on Tuesday. You got Oceanside 70.3, Texas 70.3. You got the T100 in Singapore. So a lot of good tracking this weekend for if you got athletes and friends doing those. And then a lot of good watching if you're one that likes to watch that stuff on YouTube or outside TV or whatever your streaming service that you have. It's going to be, I think, pretty much all day Saturday. Competing coverages, which will be interesting with Singapore and Oceanside going on at the same time. We're going to have a little split screen action. And then Sunday you won't have anything to watch because Texas 7.3 is not televised, but it will be trackable. So yeah, first time of the year. Good luck to all the athletes that are racing. Hope you do fantastic and have a good time, regardless of your plans for the race. Hope it all goes well. And then that kind of launches into some of the bigger races of the year, Ironman Texas a few weeks afterwards. But yeah, exciting time of the year, ready to get rolling. People seem to be a little more excited, getting outside for some outside bike rides. I mean, again, like talking about getting fed up with triathletes always find a way to get fed up with swimming, I feel like, but it's that like transitional part of the season where you've got a lot of people are getting outside for their first rides of the year, and then we talked about this like a month ago. Like you get outside once, and then all of a sudden you now hate the trainer, and then you don't want to do it again. And then you've got it. I know this because I'm a swimmer, but we're going from short course season to long course season, and you go from feeling like, you know what, and to be fair, it does suck, but you go from short course 25 yards to 50 meters. And you go from like swimming across, like a shallow, narrow creek to feeling like you're having to cross the English Channel. I mean, the difference between 25 yards and 50 meters feels like 6 miles. Mm-hmm. And now that's long course season. Most pools that you go to, if they have competitive teams, they move it to long course. And it's like, just as I felt like I was getting into good shape, now I've got to go 50 meters and you're just slower. And I think, again, that kind of just plays into like that transitional part of the year we talked about last week where it's getting a little bit warmer. We talked about intensity. We talked about, the panic that people have this time of year. We're getting closer to races. The temperature's changing. Go from short course to long course. Now we're outside. Everything looks different. And it was interesting because a conversation I had earlier this week, and we can make this the topic or not the topic today, but for a short end of the week cap. But I know we've been talking a lot about intensity, and that's been a buzzword, I think, for the last year or two, ever since the kind of like the Norwegian train, or the quote unquote Norwegian method, went all in on intensity control and being specific about it. But I thought an interesting topic for today might be this discussion. And I was talking to an athlete earlier this week, and they were asking about, did you, and I think we talked fairly at length about this on Tuesday, about how it's very, very challenging to discern as a coach the stress response from a workout you give someone based on the other factors outside their life, right? And the emotional, mental stress and its impact on your ability to recover, or the mental and emotional, physical extra ask you have to produce X amount of watts, speed or pace, whatever it might be. And they said, hey, I just want to check in. Like, is this a low intensity week, or is this like a low, like a recovery week? And I said, no. I said, actually, it's a little bit of a bump. And the reason they asked that was because the intensity was down, but the easy volume was up. And I think that's it's probably a good segue, actually, or a follow-up cast to when we had Tuesday and talking about intensity is, I think there's a huge misunderstanding with a lot of athletes, especially self-coach athletes, and like the quantity or the quality, or quality over quantity. Which one do you fall behind? But the interesting kind of topic that I brought up was, well, I've only got you, and they're riding a ton right now because they're not doing swimming, but I got two hard rides that weren't that hard, and then 3 longer kind of aerobic rides. And I said, well, I know those look easy, but the thing is that if you ride hard all the time, when it's time to actually ride aerobic, and let's say you have like a big watt range, this is for cycling specifically, but it also could be for running, is if you go with like a high intensity block, which I would imagine is most triathletes this time of year, just because of either one, they're doing most of their stuff inside and they don't want to go long, or they just got limited time and availability, so they just want to try to quote unquote make the most out of their sessions. Nothing wrong with that. But what happens is let's say you go Tuesday and you've got a really, really hard ride and you put out a lot of watts, and the next day you've got an aerobic ride and your range is, let's say 170 watts to 195. Well, you wake up that day and you're not feeling that great, and because your legs are a little bit tired, a little bit fatigued and sluggish from the day before, and you're only able to like barely meet the required like 171. So you're barely in the range. You maybe even are fighting a little bit. And I always see people fight that range when they kind of drop down in cadence. It's kind of a cue. If they don't comment, and they're like, and they just had to grind out they can't raise their heart rate because they're probably under recovered. They haven't, or they rode too hard the day before. So you can really tell when athletes kind of grinding things out if they actually go back and they like look at their cadence. So they just try to grind out the minimum effort. Well, on the flip side, you might next week schedule them on a Tuesday for an intense ride, but maybe the intensity is lower. Maybe the rep scheme is different. Maybe the rest is longer. And so they feel better going into the same ride the next day. And they've got that same 170 to 195 range. But because they wake up and feel fresh, they're able to push up to 185, 190, maybe even up to 195. And they feel better. Heart rate's lower, legs a little bit snappier. And so while it might look like on the surface, and let's say you do that like twice that week, you do a hard ride and easy ride, later in the week you do another hard ride and easy ride. Well, on the surface, because you see two hard rides and just maybe 2 to 3 easy rides, you think, oh, this is am I having a down week? It's not nearly as much intensity. And we talk about stress and the accumulation of the week. But if you look at what actually happens at the end of the week, and if they're able to push those higher watts on those easy rides, feel better, have more snap, feel better aerobically, there's a high likelihood at the end of the week they're actually going to have produced more stress. Different kind of stress, but more stress. So again, you could have a 2 hard ride week and then 3 rides, that are all aerobic, or you could have 3 hard rides in a week and 2 that are aerobic, and you still might have higher stress in the one that's got the most aerobic rides, because you're able to push higher on those days. And so I think again, I think it's important for every athlete, coach, whether you have working on a plan or self-coach, to make sure you understand like that you can find intensity everywhere, and stress is accumulated in every session, and it's just how you're accumulating that stress. Like there's, just like in life, like there's training stress, there's professional stress, there's life stress, there's relationship stress. It's all different, but it all adds up to fill up the same bucket, which is the stress that you have to deal with every single day. And so I think, again, when you're looking at your training schedule, you're looking for people that ride hard all the time, it's important to take into account, what is that hard ride and the impact it's having on, on my day-to-day easy sessions, which is like, there's a couple different, protocols you can do and go through where you're, ride hard for like 5 sessions in 1 week, and then the next 3 weeks you just do one hard ride, and the rest of them are like 3 to 4 easy, and you see a big bump. But again, just remember that there's a lot of ways to accumulate and create stress and accumulate intensity and adapt, and it doesn't always have to be in a really hard ride, because a lot of times if your ride is too hard, then the next day isn't an aerobic solid ride that's going to elicit a really good adaptation. It's going to be more of a quote unquote recovery ride where you're fighting to be in zone 2, but likely going to end up in zone
1. So what's the topic? Is it the stress outside? See, like I think of that, like to me, sometimes those zone 2, the quote unquote, the easy rides or aerobic rides, those things feel like they take more out of me sometimes. So I'm with you on that, because it's like, I can do sort of these interval things and jacket everything up, and I get off this thing, I'm feeling alive and well. And then it's a weird thing, right? Because you sometimes feel amazing after stuff like that, but then the next day it's like, man, you're a little bit sluggish, and then you got to kind of, like you're saying, grind out some of those quote unquote easy rides or whatever. But those sort of, I think that's been my dilemma my whole triathlon life, actually, is that these kind of, and I think that's why I get so averse sometimes to power, because I like to feel where I'm at and kind of explore it a lot more, instead of like, you talk about ranges, and I think sometimes people have a tendency to not really embrace the range, low to high or whatever like that, and they're just trying to lock in and nail something. I remember thinking back to sometime, what was it, Tri Bike Split or whatever the hell that thing's called, and
Best Bike Split,
and there was this whole thing about, you need, if you average 175 watts, you'll be done in 5 hours and 52 minutes or something like that, based on the weight of the bike and the hills and all that stuff. And I just remember how that would be psychologically get in my head about this, if I could stay at 175 or whatever. And to me, that whole idea of, kind of locking down and being on point with that is stressful. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like, I like to sort of like be in the range and just kind of float around in it, and then just assume that it's going to average out or whatever. But, and I think that's probably what most people do. But I also think that sometimes when numbers are sitting in front of us, we try to kind of stay with it. Like I remember, the times I have played with power, sometimes I get so obsessed with like, oh man, I'm like, wait, you know what I mean? Like over time, it does seem to even out. And I don't know what I'm saying here, but I just think that like sometimes sustaining something for a long time, to me, just feels way harder.
Well, and here's the question that, and you brought it up, and I haven't really thought about it in this way before, but psychologically, when you see a range that's a low to high, you think failure, and then you think exceeding expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So the tendency here, right, is to stay as far away from, failure and as close as you can to exceeding expectations, or at least at minimum, par for the course, right smack dab in the middle. And I think like I love ranges, and like we do ranges for a reason, because they're usually pretty broad. right? Because I know a lot of programs or coaches do like an absolute watt, or an absolute pace, which I think is ridiculous. But I do still think there's a conversation to be had, because it's psychologically, when you see it, and especially if it's delivered from a coach, and this is again like the psychological piece, I don't think maybe sometimes we as coaches appreciate or take into account enough, is that when you put in a watt range, they see coach expects me to be able to do this today. And while we think that's reasonable, you still never know. Professional coaches, professional athletes, they still never know. Same goes for us, right? You can't know. But when you see a range, again, you think minimum, and you think, you think failure, or I can't meet it. And so when you think that, you might fight tooth and nail just to get into the bottom of the range. But the truth is that if you're again, going back to like a really, really hard ride, then the next day you can't meet it, or you're grinding it out, the best case scenario for you to do is to ride easy in the intent or the spirit of the workout, regardless of the range that's provided. Because again, you're going for the appropriate amount of stress or lack of stress that's going to allow you to recover, right? The best sessions can only be the best sessions if you allow your body to recover. You can't go hard on a Tuesday and then also hard on a Wednesday and Thursday and expect to recover well from the Tuesday in order to adapt from and come back stronger, because you're continuously beating your body down on Wednesday and Thursday. And not only can you not expect to recover on Tuesday, but you can't expect to go to the well deep enough on Wednesday and Thursday to even get a response. You're just digging deeper into overtraining. You're not recovering. And most coaches will tell you, most athletes aren't overtrained, they're under recovered. They just don't do enough outside of training to take care of their body in a way. They don't focus on sleep. They don't limit screen time. They don't try to limit stress. They don't eat right. They don't fuel right. So all those things are things that you can't know as a coach, right? Because no coach does, unless you're just living with that person 24/7. And so I think, while ranges are important, you should always look at the zone that is prescribed or given, and understand, again, going back to feel, know what that feels like. So if I gave you a watt range, again, that 170, like 195, that's your zone 2 range. Well, if 170 doesn't feel like zone 2, then I should go lower to what feels like zone 2 for that day. Moderate, conversational, all-day pace. And if it happens to be 160, 155, 150, then that's the intent of the day. And that's what you're supposed to do. Not go over that to meet the range, because the description and the feel is the combination of what we felt from the day before, or maybe early in the day, what we're prepping for you tomorrow, is going to make things click and connect and be beneficial. But if it doesn't feel like that, and it feels more like high zone 2, zone 3, and your legs are super sore and you're grinding it out and you just want to push higher, then that's not going to be what it is. And even if the stress score might, say that you were in line, the truth of the matter is that you were not. And so again, there's so much to be said, and there's so many people that focus on, intensity control and has to be this specific, but that's just, it's a borderline. It's not impossible, but it borderline feels like it some days, especially for age groupers. And so, we always say, go with the spirit of the workout. You got a trainer ride that we give you that's very structured and probably best to be done inside just because of the structure of it. Maybe we just need more specifics, but you want to take it outside, just go with the spirit of the workout. It doesn't have to be perfect, right? And I think again, I know we're harping on this right now, but I think we've almost gone way over the edge on trying to be overly specific, in that we are it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, and spending all your time trying to find the needle instead of maybe just removing every piece of straw you could possibly find first, and then you'll just end up with a needle. And I think we get ourselves into trouble, and people have burnout, because again, it's not dangerous, right? But it does. I think it feeds into, it's kind of the perfect story sometimes for certain people, is that you on the one hand, you've got this digital age where we're comparing, and you can post everything you do and sync to everything possible and get likes and feedbacks and videos and high fives and comments and Strava segments and KOMs and beat your last lap on this from Zeph from like 17 years ago. And then you've got like over specific, all, X, Y, and Z. And I wonder how many times I say interesting in a podcast, at least like 19 or 20. But it's like, if I look back again at, like we talked about, I think 2 weeks ago, about some of like the sessions that I've had up for like, whatever, not 10, 11, 12, 13 years. I mean, longer than that, before I got sober, I was coaching people, and those same workouts exist, and that I give them, they're just built, but also the results still exist. The results are still there I coached, I think, my first athlete on the podium to Ironman Florida, like 2 weeks before I went to rehab. So like 12 years ago, no prescribed, like no pre-built, no fancy syncs, just straight up effort. And what's it supposed to feel like? And there, we've had athletes, smash PRs with chrono watches. And so I think I think the responsibility also falls on the coach, right? And I get in this, like, cause maybe I'm weird, but I like building workouts because I like how it looks. I'm not gonna lie. But I also think I can be a trap, because you try to kind of over control and, manipulate in the best way, and again, the best way possible. So maybe two great examples is I've been trying to do more course specific kind of trainings on like long rides and long runs. And so I got a big group doing St. George. And so I've got like pre-built based on the terrain for the bike course. You got Snow Canyon, which is long. So I've got, kind of like rollers, and then I've got, a long climb. So I got extended minutes at like big gear, and then I got a descent. So you're thinking of like, higher cadence, so probably a little bit lower power. And then you got the finish. And that's all built. You can see it all. It's nice and pretty. You got prompts and training peaks. And then on the other side, you have a totally non-built run or a non-built workout, just script, which I know is like triathletes are like, well, I can't do this run. It's not pre-built. I mean, or they pre-built it themselves, or like, hey, did you forget to build it? Or I don't even know how to follow this. And I just simply wrote it out just like I used to write every run workout over a decade ago. And I was trying to be real specific, and I just said, again, and I just picture it, right? Because if you're in Training Peaks or you have a paid plan or whatever it is, like you see pre-built workouts, what they look like in Training Peaks, where it's in strength training, swimming, cycling, and running. You know what it looks like, right? It looks nice and pretty. You got graphs, it laps for you. All it's like, it's very catered. And then for the run, again, I was trying to do the same thing because we're getting closer and closer races, so I want it to feel very much like the race. And I just said, first, again, just writing it out, first 5 to 10 minutes, super nice and easy, quick feet, your leg, just like you're coming out of T2. Legs are going to be pretty tired from the hard session the day before. So again, you're just going to be like T2. I said, and then I want, and then the main set is, I think I said 70 to 85 minutes maybe, where you are taking all the uphills, short, perfect strides, middle to zone 3, in all things, middle of zone 3 legs, middle of zone 3 heart rate. And then on every downhill, I want long strides, and I want it to feel like zone 2 in the heart, but it's in your lung. It's not going to be because of the impact on legs. And I want really, really, really long strides to do extra impact on your quads, because that's just like the St. George course. And then I just said, after that meet, cool down here. And again, it wasn't specific about the length of interval. I wasn't specific about the pace. I wasn't specific about the heart rate. It was just the terrain and then total minutes we looked for. And so again, if you look at both those, one looks very structured, looks very intensity controlled, looks very specific. And the other one, I'm just writing it out. And so you're like, and I think there's benefits to both, but honestly, if I had to pick a favorite, I'd probably pick the run, because it allows room for interpretation, and it allows room for whatever you deem your zone is for that day. And you talk a ton about like sometimes how long it takes, like in deep training, right? If you're really fatigued, it takes you really, really long time to warm up.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times we don't know what our true, like, it takes us, I think it takes us like 10 to 15, 20 minutes sometimes, these longer workouts, to really figure out what zone is, or what RPE correlates to what zone for the day. And so by like pre-prescribing that, you might look at, like, if I did that by pace, you might think, oh, well, my zone 3 today has to be this, but maybe that's not what your zone 3 feels like. Maybe it's higher, maybe it's lower. And so for running, when you say just, it needs to feel like this, that's really like the only check mark you need to worry about. And then I think it does set you up for success, because if I just say zone 3, tempo feel, you know what feels like what. You know what hard feels like. You know what easy feels like. You know what all out feels like. You know what, solid, cruise, tempo, whatever it is. You know what that feels like. The pace is just the output. You just need to pay attention on the input. And then that makes it a win, as long as you do, again, the two things that we always say you can only control on race day, which is effort and execution. And then I think it allows a win. It allows you to adapt. It allows you to be who you are that day, without opening up the workout and saying, okay, well, my zone 2 today is this, instead of this is who I am today, and therefore my numbers shall be this. And I just think it's something that we have to be careful of. And I think as coaches, I mean, myself specifically, like, I love to pre-build workouts, and I still don't do them for swims. I've done them for a while. I did it for a little bit, and then I just I hate this. And as long as you write them out well, it's fine. And so I just think it's something that we have to be very careful of, with the expectation we may or may not set on what we're looking for with the intensity of the day, and how that might affect the mentality of the athlete going into, and then more importantly, coming out of said session.
Yeah. I think, like, I'm sure I have a reputation of being someone who disregards or doesn't appreciate analytics or numbers and these types of things, which is not necessarily true. It's sort of like you're talking about the spirit or the intent of the workout. I always bring up, drumming analogies. To me, it's just such an interesting thing, because in a weird way, endurance sports is like drumming, because it's sort of a long, like a show or something, and it's a pacing thing. And, in drumming, there's a thing called a metronome, which is, most pop hits are between 100 and 130 beats a minute or whatever. It's just a proven thing. And when they're recording, usually they'll have a metronome in the drummer's ear, or everyone's ear probably, but the drummer has to keep the time. But over time, like, the best drummers, probably don't even need a metronome. You could just say, hey, we want this at about 110 beats a minute or whatever. And they'll just be able to do it. And to me, it's because they've really learned the intent of everything, and they've actually learned it. And when I think about like a power meter, for example, and I have used it a lot over the years, but not like depended on it. It's sort of like, I'm always interested in, all right, I'm doing this right now. What is this? This feels like this. And then it's like, okay, this is 170 power. So this is what I feel right now. This is, to me, the intent of pushing 110. So then, or 170. And then I'll try to lock that in. Right. So that's sort of the feeling. And then, if you can it's like racing blind or whatever. It's like, all right, I'm going to do this whole workout and see where it lands. And usually it's fairly close. And I've talked about how I used to run on the Greenway with a chrono watch, and they had mile markers. And I had it really down where I could really put my pace within, 4 seconds a mile or something, and really be almost able to call it out. And to me, that's what the most important thing is. It's sort of like, you know, in college basketball, you know, the analytics say don't turn the ball over, right? It's one thing to know that you shouldn't turn it over, but it's a whole other thing to like have the mechanics and the technique and the practice and the repetition to not turn it over. How not to turn it over is just to be, you know, whatever, you know. So it's like, you know, that what the analytics say, don't turn it over, you know, shoot threes, get close buckets, and not shoot mid-range jumpers. Well, it's one thing to say that, but then, you know, you've seen it all, you know, teams will go out and just completely go antithesis of that and blow it up. So it's like you have to learn and understand the mechanics of the analytics and not just like be married. So I'll go out and ride and, you know, I'll glance at that power and be like, all right, that feels about right. And then I know that's what drives my effort, right? And like you're saying, some days that may be 150 feels like it's where I should be or whatever. And then by the end of the workout, there's a lot of times when I get done with these hour and a half interval rides where I'm like, okay, now I feel good. You know, it's like, it takes a while to kind of understand. So I think that if you get out of the gate and you're looking at numbers and heart rate and all this shit right away, it's like, I don't know if it's even real for a while sometimes. So I'm just saying, sometimes I'll be running and I'll look at my heart rate and I'll be like, holy shit. And, you know, like, but I actually feel really good. And it's just, to me, it's sort of that, like, one glance at a number can really get in your head and make you sort of rigid. So
that may or may not be even accurate at the moment.
Correct. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, it's I loved the analogy about like the analytics, like, you know, it's don't turn the ball over and, you know, make your free throws. And you're probably gonna win the game. So there's like two different schools of thought. You're in there and you got pressure, you're like, don't turn the ball over, and then you got to make this, you can't miss. And then there's, you know, and to me, that mentality is I've got to hit these numbers today, no matter what. You know, this is the range. It's got to be it, and I got to go high. Everything else is a failure. Or you got the mentality of just do the next right, make the next right pass, the next right move, play fundamental basketball, and then, you know, at the free throw line, you know, do what you've always done. One of them is just, you know, very monotonous, very go with the flow. The other one is panic and pressure. And, you know, and that's why, like, you know, again, like when I write, especially with running, because I do find that running has the most impactful variables on the athlete. And, you know, that's sometimes I'll try to like be overly verbose and I'll say, like, you know, zone 3 / open half marathon effort / you know, tempo pace / you know, 6 out of 7 scale. And they're like, and I'll still get questions. They're like, yeah, but what pace? And I'm like, no idea. No clue.
Mm-hmm.
Zero. Because your pace could be dictated. Again, we've talked about this before, but it's always great to remind, because, you know, I could say zone 3 and that the difference could just be taking a right out of your driveway or taking a left. You take a right out of your driveway and you go on the hilly route, and your zone 3 pace might be 8 minute. You take the left out of your driveway, and a zone 3 pace, because of the terrain, might be 720s. Heart rate's going to be, you know, around the same, probably, because, you know, one's going to be hillier, you have to go slower, you know, slow down and keep your heart rate in check. But you'll know that by just, you know, your respiratory rate and how you're breathing. That's why there's such a huge difference, you know. Or, you know, like I've got athletes that are, you know, like on spring break right now, traveling abroad and in these like exotic, you know, tropical places. And they're like, dude, I am suffering on my runs, right? They're like a minute slower. Are they slower? No. But a 9 minute mile in the tropics is like an 8 minute mile in the nice, cool, you know, springtime Colorado, where it's like 45, 50, 55. Or what if again, you launched this off today with like the windy north. It's windy as hell here right now. So a zone 3 one direction into the wind might give me like 940s. And then on the return trip, I might be rolling 720s, baby. So which one's right? They're both right. And it's like, same thing, you know, again, that's why I can buy watts and stuff and not miles per hour, you know, when you ride your bike. But it's just, I can't think of any easier example to get across that it is an effort. You know, what your body feels is the experience, not the number. You know, your body knows, you know, time and stress. It doesn't know pace. And that's why it doesn't know miles. It has no idea. You walk through, your body has no idea you ran 10 miles. It just knows I ran this long at this speed, which caused this amount of stress. And this is how it's going to feel afterwards. That's it. And that's why, again, like to me, like the best intensity control isn't to be overly specific in your pacing and your watt ranges, right? The best intensity, and we get this, you know, I get this question all the time from newer athletes, but it is a tried and true. It's like effort and duration is the ultimate intensity control. And that's why we control our runs with duration. Why not miles? Because again, going back to, you know, take a right out of your driveway, take a left. 18 miles to your right might take you 3 hours. 18 miles to your left might take you 2:15. That's a huge gap between the two. Giant gap. So which one's right? That's why, again, duration and effort. And so, you know, when you think about, you know, the intention of your workouts for the weekend and you're going long, you're going short, or whatever it is you're doing, before you even open up the workout, remind yourself, you know, the intent is this. You know, intent is to feel like this. The intent is to be this, not to be rigid within your range. And I think, to me, that's the best intensity control. And to me, like the best type of intensity control isn't scientific. It's learning your body and making these decisions yourself each and every time you go out. Because ultimately you are the one, the athlete, that has to do the workout. You are ultimately responsible for executing the intensity control. You got a runner that always likes to overrun. They're doing a piss poor job of intensity control. And they're doing their own self-harm by going too hard, too often, all the time. So the best intensity control isn't being overly specific. It's knowing what feels like what, and then adhering to the intent and the spirit of the session and how it's supposed to complement the next day's session and how it's supposed to allow you to recover from the previous days, or if it's supposed to ask you and demand you to go harder that day to get a better response. It really is that simple. And I think we as coaches and we as athletes, you know, tend to overcomplicate that in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, because, I mean, it just, the microcosm of all of it to me sometimes becomes, it's like everything becomes so serious. You know, Emily texted me something she listened to on a podcast, and it said, the line was, the problem is that we've turned movement from play into punishment. And that just really resonated with me, because it's like there's something so beautiful about everything we do and how, and the intent of what should be going on, and moving our bodies and having, you know, feeling good and all this kind of things. But the minute you put that rigid factor in there, like the turnover thing, it's like it's like, yeah, we lost the game because we had too many turnovers. Well, why'd we have so many turnovers? Well, we were tense, or we were sloppy, or we just, you know, weren't feeling it, or whatever like that. We didn't want to be there that night. And I think that if we can just somehow like shift the needle and make our workouts more enjoyable and be more flow or more fluid with them and enjoy them, all that stuff kind of to me just sort of falls into place. But if we're just always locked into like forcing ourselves into it, you know what I mean? Like it's all the horizon is wide open, but we just got to force ourselves into this little box here. And to me, that creates stress. So it's like over time too, it's, you know, that's the thing, is it's sort of a slow drip. It's like the more we train this way or whatever, the less we have fun with what we're doing, the more tense it feels. And then all of a sudden it kind of just bogs us down, and we're forcing everything, and it just becomes less enjoyable. So, Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm always talking about, but I still love the old training plans with the, the non-built stuff, and it's sort of like RPE based, and just love to kind of go with the flow and what feels like. It's like go hard, go all out. Well, for a lot of people that is 80 to, well, if you're FTP, it's like that could be 85 to 135 or whatever effort. It's like a lot of people fall in the 90s. That's like my all out. Is it really? I don't know. It's like I'm so intrigued by finding that ability to go deeper when you have to, or you're exploring that. I just think it's really interesting to me how so many people, I think, don't really know their edge on the bike. They think something's hard, but it's just like there's so much more. And that's why when I talk about that we got 70.3s going this weekend, and I always tell people on the bike is like, yeah, don't burn your biscuits, but I want you to toast them a little, because I think you got a little bit more. You know what I mean? Get off that bike, and that felt like a hard bike ride, sure, but it doesn't mean your run's going to suffer necessarily. It just depends, like how far over. Don't burn them, just get them a little bit crispy. And that's like the edge, right, that we got to find.
Two things, and we can close it out. But that's why swimming,
same thing.
That's why I think you can't pre-build it.
Mm-hmm.
It's still like, if I'm ever working with a swimmer, I'm like, all right, I want you to swim a 130 pace on this. They're like, I don't know how to do that. I can't see it. You don't ever say that. You're like, all right, I want you to swim solid. I want you to cruise. I want you to take this easy. I want you to go hard. I want you to build. All things that you can feel. They don't wear watches. They go off the clock. They just see when they're done. And they got to hold certain things, but like it's just very raw. You have to listen to your body and what feels like what. And I just think that's like, again, something that we've gotten lost at. But when I go back and look at some of the best rides best rides specifically I've ever done, they've all been by feel. Just slowly building. I mean, best ride I've ever done in my life. I mean, you walked in on me like the last 30 minutes. We were at the old hub, and I was on the Watt bike, and I put out like my best hour power ever on the back end of like a 3-hour build ride. And I was just like going with the flow. There were no restrictions. There were no ranges. There was no expectation. And I just like blew it out of the water and kept going and kept going and kept going and kept going. Same thing with some of my best runs ever. Like those. That's why I love, again, the negative split run. And why I probably think we should do like more negative split riding. Is it's open for interpretation. You could start with a 10-minute mile and end with the 650, or you could start with an 8 and with the 7. How big is your range day? How big is your gap? How long is your run? But it also just forces you to feel your way through, and then kind of come back and check yourself. But also know and understand that, like, if the terrain dictates that you're slower than the previous mile, then understand that it'd be okay with that too. Right? If you all of a sudden, you hop up on a hilly rolling part of the course you're on, and you're on like the last 10-minute block of a negative split, it's going to take a lot of effort to make that split better than the previous one. But I think that's fun. Right? You got this last 10-minute section coming back to your house, and it's going to be a harder section. You're like, man, I just went to, and the reason it's fun is because if you know the route you're going on, then you know it was coming. So instead of just pacing it like you don't know what's coming, just like in a race, you should pace it as if you know what's coming. So you save a little bit in the tank, because in order to negative split, I'm going to have more energy, more in my reserve to drop from a 9-minute to an 8:53 or an 8:50 or an 8:40, because it's going to be rolling. It's going to take a flat 8-minute effort just to drop it. So out of the gate, knowing your terrain, knowing the course, I can't do it that way. Flat course, doesn't matter. You can just kind of methodically pinch it off. But again, like there's freedom in that, and there's like a tactical precision in that you have to think through when that course, that route by your house. It's coming, It wasn't a surprise. They didn't like do construction and reroute the street and create mountains while you were gone for your 1.5 hour run. You knew it was coming. So pace it correctly. Right? You walk out, it's a little bit hotter, pace it correctly. You wake up, you feel like your heart rate's a little bit higher, you don't feel good, pace it correctly. That's the true definition of intensity control. Not being in some lab and checking lactate every 2 seconds and checking every measurement every possible minute you possibly can. That's overcomplicating things for so many athletes. Again, and there's a giant margin of error with all of these things, which again just causes more confusion. Like you said, you look down, your heart rate's wacky. I mean, there's been sometimes I'm out around we can tell when your heart rate monitor is like running out of batteries, it's like 83. And I'm like, I'm definitely not 83 right now. Like I'm already like cruising. Or you're running in with lots of trees overhead, and you can see your absolute pace like within the second go from 840 to 925 based on what kind of GPS coverage it has. But if you just glance down, you see the 940, like, God, I feel so slow today. Then as soon as you take your eyes back off and you look up, you'll never see it again, but it dropped right back down to like 830. Little did you know, you were having a solid day, but you made a leaping assumption that it was off because of the gadget on your arm.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I like to keep things as simple as possible so I can understand them. And I think back to, I was never an endurance sport growing up, athlete. And I remember when I first started doing all this stuff and I was going to do my first 5K, and that to me was like crazy at the time, endurance wise. And I remember going to the first race I ever did, and I got there and people were actually warming up. They were running before the race. I was like, this is ridiculous. It's like, I'm going to need all my energy just to finish. And at some point in there, I learned about this concept of negative splitting, and it just seems so crazy to me that it's like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to run, half marathon and actually feel like I'm getting stronger at the end. That just seemed like completely out of the realm. But to me, it's been the most valuable lesson I've ever learned, because as you always talk about, it's like your negative split is set up in the beginning. And that is, to me, is like kind of letting your systems kind of regulate and whatever and find your rhythm. And then all of a sudden, when you find the rhythm and you find your flow and you find your breathing, things start to get easier over time, in theory. And to me, that's how I look at everything. From if I've got a 10 or like a 5 times 5 minute interval, big gear or something like that, I always look at every interval as like I try to negative split that actual interval and then the intervals in general. That's just kind of how I like psychologically approach most things. And it doesn't have to be a massive negative split. That's one of the things I've learned is really interesting, is it's like, just make it a little bit. You got a 45-minute easy run, make that second half, a minute faster or something like that. Nothing dramatic, but just to be able to kind of dictate your pace and control your effort and have a good feel in your body for that effort. Those are some things that are just like, to me, have been invaluable. Like, I just approach things like that because if you can finish your last interval a little bit stronger, that means you set yourself up in the beginning. But it's also psychologically amazing when you can finish strong. So that's my thought on that.
I love it.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't set you up for a fun-filled RPE-based weekend, I don't know what does, baby.
Oh man, I can just
love it, man. I mean, it really is. Like, it's just really fascinating to me, and it's so tempting as as a coach. I mean, I'm sure you get this sometimes too, in like exploratory emails from athletes. Sometimes the questions I get are like, do you pre-build workouts? Like, because it is, some athletes consider that like a luxury in like a premium service. And while I get it, and like I said, I genuinely enjoy the building piece of it, because I like the absolute, like I like how it looks, right? I'm not gonna lie. Having said that, the most, fun is the right word, when I feel the most involved in creating a session is in what I write in a write or a run, or how I write out and lay out and just script a swim session. And so it again, like I just think it's a tough balance. Just like, you know, we all say we hate our phones, but we always have them. We always look at them. You know, it's like it's, I guess, like, you know, the big thing is like how to make the best out of what we have and utilize what we have available, and at the same time not completely distancing ourselves from, you know, the great results and the proven, you know, routes to get there that we've had in the past. And I just think that's a daily challenge and something that we could all, you know, focus on.
Okay, I'm down with that.
Yeah, let's take your RP this weekend and let it be what it is. As always, we love you guys. We appreciate you. Go to our website, c26triathlon.com, and is our one-stop shop for all things coaching, camps, and community. If you need anything from Mike, he's available. Mike at c26triathlon.com. If you need anything from me, Robbie at c26triathlon.com.
Yeah. And I would just like to say, you know, just because I agree with you when built workouts look great, but as you repeat something, the goal is to get better with it. So in other words, like if you got 5 intervals, I don't think you really want them all to be the same. I think you should strive to get better. It's like if I ask me to play a drum part 5 times, I should be better at it by the end. Not doing it the exact same in the beginning. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, I love it.
All right, dude. I'll catch you later.
Yeah, man. See you, buddy.
Season. See ya.